And now the country knows, and now the world knows as well. And the fact that Sir Brian has exposed that not only was there a cover-up, but there was a deliberate attempt to lie and to conceal, and not just by one person either, that this was systemic. This was by government, by civil servants, and by healthcare professionals. I think that really rocks what we think of as society and really challenges the trust that we put in people to look after us, to do their best and protect us. None of that can we take for granted anymore.
And I'd just like to add that I think that, that the deliberate destruction of records echoes that.
It's also how we were treated as well. Sir Brian brings to the fore about how the trusts and schemes that were set up to support us have treated us as well. So this is not only a cover-up, it's actually an abuse by many people who were set to supposedly care for us.
Throughout the report, Sir Brian refers to that line, the best treatment possible was given to people. And we now know once and for all that that was a lie. People have been saying that was a lie for many, many years. And now we have the definitive word on that.
We've been gaslit for generations. This report today brings an end to that. And it looks to the future as well, and says that this cannot continue, this ethos of denial and cover-up, and that the duty of care for candour has to be reviewed going forward, so that this can never happen again.
And people have lost decades of their life campaigning, and that has added to the trauma. Not only are you dealing with infection, dying, loss of family, loss of years and years of that have been wasted on this campaigning. It should never have happened. It should have been dealt with straight away.
And as I sit here as one of 27,000 blood transfusion victims, that's what echoes in my head. Behind every one of those 27,000 is a family.
Hi, Joe Pinkstone from the Daily Telegraph. I just wanted to ask you what you would say to the politicians in charge throughout the scandal and in charge now. There's some criticism of quite specific individuals in the report. I'd just like to get your thoughts on what you would say to them.
I think many of the politicians should hang their heads in shame. I think for the first time we've seen people like Jeremy Hunt and other health secretaries speak up recently and actually start to acknowledge their part in this scandal. Because no single person is responsible for this scandal. It's been the result of generations of denial, delay and cover-up. And whilst there might be an apology later today from the Prime Minister, it's not just the Prime Minister who holds responsibility and accountability for this. There are many others out there, and I would expect over the coming days and weeks for many more people to come forward and say sorry. I'm sorry for my part, and if they're genuinely sorry, they will help implement the recommendations that Sir Brian has recommended today.
And I think they need to know as well what they've been sorry for. Any apologies that we've had in the past have been meaningless, because all that they've said is that this should never have happened. We know that this should never have happened. What was your part in it? What are you sorry for? That's what the community needs to hear before we can even begin to get closure on this.
And not mess us around any longer.
I think the apology on behalf of the state will be welcome, and I think something else the community would like to see is a proper apology from all of the pharmaceutical companies that manufactured Factor 8 and 9 products as well, which includes Bayer, Baxter, Revlon Healthcare, Alpha, Abbott and their successors or subsidiaries.
Victoria MacDonald from Channel 4 News. It was made very clear that this inquiry could not recommend corporate manslaughter charges, could not go there. But do any of you think, or do you know if any complaints have been made officially to the police?
I'm not aware of any at the moment. I should say that, as well as being the chair of the Society, I'm a criminal barrister. And one of the aspects that, sadly, the delay has caused is the fact that there are doctors out there who should have been prosecuted for manslaughter, gross negligence manslaughter. doctors who were testing their patients for HIV without consent, not telling them about their infections, who then went on to sadly infect their partners, and they then went on to die. Those people should have been in the dock for gross negligence manslaughter. And sadly, because of the delay, that's one of the consequences, that so many people will not see justice as a result.
I'd like to add that that extends to the politicians and the licence makers that licensed Factor 8 when there were clear warnings in place. This has gone on for so long now that the people that were around at the time will be very hard to track down if they're even still alive. And that's one of the testimonies of the cover-up and the delays in getting justice to this scandal, is the time that it's taken has meant that justice delayed really is, in this case, justice denied.
I think a lot of the villains in this story sadly have now died. In particular, on a clinical level, I would include Professor Arthur Bloom and Dr. Charles Ritzer, who were the two leading haemophilia care figures at the time, and for whom, if they were still alive today, I think there could well be a case for criminal charges, and that's just a testament to the fact that the government did not launch a public inquiry earlier at the time. It should have happened probably in the 90s.
I mean, in the report today, it says that there was enough public interest in this scandal for the inquiry to have been launched around 1986. Just think about the delay for a moment and think how many people could have been brought to justice at that point but haven't.
I think we need to be aware too of the deliberate destruction of records. The records, not just patient records, but records kept by the Department of Health, and that has become clear in the report that they were deliberately destroyed.
And also the evidence that was coming forward and being placed in front of government by campaigners that was dismissed. I think today is about the vindication of many of those campaigners, who some have sadly died, and I think that's what needs to be remembered, that this has been 40 years of cover-up and campaigning.
Can I add that there's an unprecedented aspect to this inquiry, because Sir Brian Langstaff has said that this is not his final word. He is not sending his final report to the government today. The recommendations that he's recommended, he said that the government will have to provide a report to Parliament within 12 months about those recommendations, saying whether or not they are going to implement them or explaining why they are not going to implement them, and he will expect them to account for that, which I think is unprecedented, because what the chair of the public inquiry is saying to government is, I don't trust you. And that's what the community have been saying for decades. I believe there should be a presumption in the Inquiries Act that recommendations from inquiries should be implemented unless government can provide good reasons why not. Why is it that we continue to have these burning injustices? Why is it in the United Kingdom we continue to have these scandals? It's because we ignore the recommendations of public inquiries, and that must stop today.
Hi, sorry, Joe Pinkstone from the Daily Telegraph again. I just wondered, my understanding is that there's some court cases that have been paused while the inquiry makes its final report. I wonder if you feel the final report is enough of a sense of justice, or if you'll be perhaps resuming legal action against the state.
In regards to the group litigation in my name against the Department of Health, that will very much, I think, depend on what the government does now, particularly in terms, it's a civil case, depending on how they come forth tomorrow with their proposals on compensation and what that looks like. I think that will go a long way in helping to decide what we do with that case next, and if we lift the stay. There are other litigations, such as the Trelaw litigation and other litigations going on as well, but I wouldn't be able to comment on those.
Hi, Emeline Van for Radio France International. What's the general feeling at the reading of this report? Is it relief, renewed anger, vindication?
I think for me, there's been a whirlwind of emotions today. I'm sure everybody on this table would agree with that. When you've been building up to a single day for 40 years, there's no wrong or right emotion about it. But for campaigners who have been doing this for so long, for saying the things that are now in this report for so long, I think relief, absolute relief, will be an overriding emotion, and that's certainly the case for me.
I think many feel that like this is the beginning of the end, because having had an excellent public inquiry, and we should commend the chair and his team for the inquiry, the ball is now in the government's court, and it will depend on the government response. And until we have a full government response in terms of compensation, all the other recommendations, it's only then we will be able to judge whether or not this inquiry has been successful or not.
Hi, my name's Emilio. I work for Politico. I have a question which is, obviously we've seen sort of some similarities with this recent post office scandal as well, where it seems like the politicians didn't really take it seriously enough, or potentially worse. Corporate wrongdoing potentially was brushed under the carpet. It's taken a really long time for people to notice that and to get to close to an end to that situation. Do you think, thinking about that and this situation, do we have a kind of wider problem with our society or our politics in terms of listening to people who have been wronged and getting things sorted quickly and trusting them, essentially?
That goes back to what I said earlier about the truth. This is the day of the truth, and it's up to society, up to you, the media, to ensure that that truth gets told and to keep coming back to it. Otherwise, we will be back in a situation, and millions of pounds of money that's been put into this inquiry would have been wasted.
I think
Sorry.
after you.
I was just going to say, I think that that if we look back at this, it was cost that was a huge factor in why they bought in the American products, in why they didn't screen the blood for transfusion. And now cost is a factor yet again, because it's going to cost much, much more, and has cost much, much more. And that's just in monetary terms, and I'm not thinking then of even the loss of life, which is the most unbearable cost.
Not only is the loss of life, that those people who are still infected need ongoing health and social care needs, and that needs to be addressed within any compensation package, and that needs to be talked about.
I think today sees the victory of truth over power, and you talk about the post office scandal and this scandal. Healthcare and the law are the twin pillars of our civil society, and they've both been rocked to their foundations by both of these scandals. Had this inquiry happened decades ago when it should have happened, might the post office scandal or large parts of it have been avoided? Possibly. And that's the real tragedy of this, that we continue not to learn from failures.
I mean, we've mentioned two scandals, this one and the post office. There are many others that coalesce around the Hillsborough Law Now campaign, which Andy Burnham started, such as the nuclear test veterans, Grenfell Tower fire, the story of Zane, who died as a result of toxic matter in a family household. There are so many of these campaigns, and they all need to be looked at.
I think the civil service has closed ranks around a lie for a long time in this inquiry, and I think the similar thing has happened in the post office and many of the other inquiries that Jason has just mentioned. And ministers, sadly, weren't given the truth. And I think that decision was made a long time ago, and money is at the source of it. It seems to be always at the source of it. And we know there were conversations in higher levels of government saying that if you compensate the haemophiliacs, then that sets a precedent. So let's not do it. And when you continue that line, that government line, and closing your ranks around denial, then that's the sort of this is the result of it, and the post office is the result of it. And we need systemic change and a duty of candour at all levels of government, including the civil service, to make ministers absolutely aware of what the options are and then maybe we'd have a chance of not having this repeated.
Thanks. It's Ryan at the Mail. Some of the strongest words in the report today were for Lord Clark, who Sir Brian described as combative and his evidence as argumentative. He said that will have aggravated the distress and upset of many. I wondered if anybody had any thoughts on what Sir Brian said.
I spent 3 days watching Lord Clark giving evidence, and he was patronising in the extreme. He had clearly never met anybody with haemophilia, and considering this is the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS, for the Health Secretary not to sit down with that community and actually meet them and learn about what's happened to them is absolutely appalling. And sadly, he continues in that disposition. And I think he owes the community an apology, not just for his time as Health Secretary, but for the manner and the lack of humanity and compassion that he showed when he gave evidence to this inquiry.
And disdain for the inquiry itself and its process.
One of the things that stands out in my mind from Lord Clark's evidence is that he asked, is factor 8 a pill? He didn't even know what it was. And I actually used that as a way to ask the media to please assist with the public understanding about that product and why it's so dangerous, because it is fundamental to the report today.